Good evening. We're back. It's been a long time, but we are back here on the Debrief Podcast. I'm Josh Durso, joined by my co-host, Jackie Augustine. We are here in the brand new, well, relatively new, fingerlakes1.com studio at North Park. It's really bigger, great. Isn't it? We are way further apart than we normally are for this podcast, so this is a little bit of a trippy experience.
The room at you, but yeah, this is great, and I have a desk, which feels very.
You've been
formal.
Upgraded
Not
to
in my
desk
comfy chair with my.
Once you go to a desk
jacket.
with the amount of paperwork and computer equipment and things that you bring to the table, you need a desk. You need a workspace.
I know. I'm usually just balancing it on my lap, but now it's spread out here on the table.
So, boy, a lot of stuff has been going on.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
We've kind of abandoned the opening thoughts, but I feel like at this point we kind of need to. What has the last month and week been like for you? Watching all of the various things that have been happening play out, because a lot has been happening.
Yeah, I keep asking myself, are we in like a perpetual full moon or something? Because what's going on defies prediction or logic. And there's a lot of interesting stuff, scary interesting, not necessarily happy interesting, but both locally and nationally and in the state. I mean, there's a lot to talk about.
Right. So let's jump into topic number one. This has been by far one of the most bizarre situations to live through and to watch play out. Local law number 3 in Seneca Falls. The Seneca Falls Town Board had been mulling over, the last time we were here, had been mulling over a local law which would rescind local law number 2 of 2016. And the idea was that it would eliminate the closure date, which had been set in that law for Seneca Meadows, the landfill that operates on Route 414. The law passes, so the board votes 3-2 to pass it.
Right.
And then, as if things couldn't get stranger,
They did.
And there was an incident. We'll call it an incident. It was...
Can you call it an altercation, or is that not...
So I initially called it an altercation in a story I wrote that we ran on Finger Lakes One, and a few people brought it to my attention that because the allegations are one-sided, that one town councilor approached another and harassed that individual, and that individual didn't respond, that it no longer becomes an altercation. It's a really touchy...
That's a nuance that I wasn't aware of. Okay,
right.
Good to know.
Okay, so that's where... So... An alleged incident of harassment, which is allegedly on film, happened at a local restaurant here in Seneca Falls after the vote and after some barbs were exchanged between a couple of the counselors. Obviously, they were on opposite sides of the vote. One voted yes, another voted no. But I guess my question to you, as being someone who doesn't live in Seneca Falls, what is your take, not just your take on it, but what is it like watching that kind of thing play out at this hyper local level?
Yeah.
When you aren't actually, having to deal with it face to face.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the meeting. I watched your broadcast of the meeting, and it makes me, I guess the whole thing makes me sad, that and the stuff that's going on in Geneva, because I'm just wondering where the leaders are. And I couldn't understand the hostility at the meeting, the Seneca Falls meeting, because I thought the question that was posed was a legitimate inquiry about a potential conflict of interest. And the response was not, all right, let's make a point of fact and clear this up. It immediately escalated into, a perceived personal attack and just defensiveness. And it was clear there was no possibility of a constructive conversation being had about it. And then, it comes out later that the allegations are true, that when it comes to campaign contributions, it is lopsided, and it is the case that at least one person voting in favor of the local law had their campaign almost entirely funded by Seneca Meadows, and that should raise eyebrows. I mean, people should be asking questions about that. It's one thing. There's the difference between, like you were talking about, what constitutes an altercation, right? Well, there's also this question of what's a conflict of interest and what is the appearance of impropriety. And as an elected official, you're supposed to avoid both of those things. So even if it didn't rise to an official conflict, which I'm not sure it does or not, I mean, I'd have to look into it a little bit more, but there's definitely an appearance of a conflict, and that you'd think would give somebody pause to say, yeah, maybe I'm undermining the legitimacy of this entire governing body by acting this way.
Okay, so that's I want to jump in at that point. I feel we ran a story right after the meeting happened and after the alleged incident took place, and in that you could sort of, if you watched the actual footage from that meeting, you gathered that there was one particular remark that Councilor Dave DeLaylis said to Councilor Tom Ruzicka that seemed to cause a lot of the angst between them. Was essentially Dave DeLaylis called out the potential conflict, right, and Councilor Ruzicka fired back. And when he fired back, he made the statement that many businesses have donated
right.
to
He's pro-business.
He's
Lots
pro-business.
Of yeah.
And
yep.
I almost feel like it could have been a slip of tongue. It could have been a mistake that you're in the heat of the moment and you just are saying something and it comes out. And when I heard him say it, I almost thought to myself, with the amount of scrutiny that's already been placed on this issue and with the amount of eyeballs that are already on this whole campaign finance issue in Seneca Falls because of the landfill, I almost wondered if there was any part of like instant regret in saying that, because it was clearly false. We went through the campaign finance records, and I do want to say this. A lot of questions came after that ran along the lines of, well, how much money did the other candidates, the two Democrats who ran against the two Republicans, get? And where did that money come from? Well, as it turns out, they had no filings whatsoever in 2016 because there was so little money actually contributed.
The reporting threshold.
Yeah, they didn't cross the threshold. So I just think, and some people, when they hear that, they're going to say, oh, no way. And that's kind of the divisive spot we're in now in Seneca Falls. It's like there is no meeting in the middle anymore.
No,
it's gone.
And even, that argument about, well, who gave to the other counselors would be a legitimate criticism if what was before the board was a resolution pitting two business interests against one another.
Right.
But this is about private interest versus public interest. So it really is incumbent on the person who is funded by the private interest to explain how that's not affecting their judgment. And frankly, the comeback that, well, it's not affecting my judgment because a ton of businesses donated, so this is just one amongst many, I immediately said, you want to give somebody the benefit of the doubt. You want to say, I bet this person would not lie. People are going to take issue with using that word. I'm sure people are very sensitive about the word lie. That's knowingly saying something false is a lie. That's how I define it. So you'd like to think nobody, when directly confronted, would lie. So I was thinking to myself, wow, maybe there's some filing out there that all these other businesses banded together to back his candidacy. I don't see it.
Well, and that's the other thing, too. I thought to myself, well, wow, if other businesses did donate, that almost opens up an even more terrible can of worms for everyone in Seneca Falls, because that begins the process of actual campaign finance violations where you aren't disclosing who's donating what.
Right.
And that's an even more slippery slope.
Yeah. I mean, he's backed himself into a corner. He either has to say, I have all these unreported donations, or I told a lie. Neither one is really going to be a
Neither is good.
answer.
They're both terrible.
Those are two bad alternatives.
Now, to that end, so that will have that will go through its court process.
Right.
But there is also, simultaneously, the call for resignation, which has been very loud. That message has been loud over the last several days. We had a story that we've been following the last few months about Richmond Town Supervisor who is going through some legal issues himself. And just sort of looking at these scenarios as a whole. When we talked about that the first time, I said on this actual podcast, I said, if he's guilty, it's bad for himself and the town. And if he's not guilty, he's damaged. It's the damage that's done already.
Right.
Councilor Ruzicka has to run if he chooses to this fall again. And frankly, I'm afraid for on his political behalf, I'm not sure he will be the same person that he was before this incident, no matter how it plays out.
Right.
And that just kind of seems like the unfortunate side effect of when something gets this heated, when people become this divided, these are the kinds of tensions. This is the kind, and at some point, everyone's going to have to come to the table and everyone's going to have to talk like adults.
Yeah, yes. Thank you for saying that, because that's the missing piece. And maturity, I think, through a lot of this.
It was strange because last week there was a public hearing on a sewer plan that would, in theory, potentially move under the Ludovico Trail here in Seneca Falls, and that was a somewhat controversial issue in and of itself. But because of how controversial the landfill issue is, it just doesn't seem all that bad. But throughout that public hearing, you could see that it was there. The maturity, the ability to handle the situation like an adult. And everyone sitting at that table at one point or another was acting like an adult.
Well, that's good.
And I wonder if we're now at the point of no return on this landfill issue where it's become so damaging and it's lasted for so long that this is what this particular administration is going to have to deal with right through the rest of their terms.
Yeah. Yeah, it is one of those legacy issues, I think. I mean, it's a project, it's an enterprise of such magnitude that impacts so many systems, right? I mean, from nonprofit support to the business community, to residents, all of that, captured within the environmental and ecological issues. I don't see how it isn't an agenda item for everything that they're doing from now on, because it's not just that it's polarizing, but it is a big issue. So I guess that is the question that we're left with in terms of Seneca Falls. Like, who is willing to consistently be an adult and work on this to move other issues forward, to make sure that the business of the town doesn't get completely subsumed by discussion of the landfill and that. So I don't know. I mean, that's
it's a terrible spot to I hate to put it this way, but this is the result of particular leaders backing themselves into a corner. You box yourself into a corner and you only have one direction to go. Right. And they had to move directly through this issue. They didn't want to move on from it or move away from it. So now they're here.
Yeah, and frankly, I mean, I think it boils down to this issue of ego, right? People get into public office for a variety of reasons. And unfortunately, when push comes to shove, it's revealed that for some people, the feeling of being powerful and part of something that they think allows them to tell other people what to do, or it goes to their head. And not being able to put the public interest first is a sure way to sink a government body, right? When it devolves into just a battle of wills, of personal egos.
One side versus another and nothing else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So speaking of one side versus another, so that Tuesday when the local law in Seneca Falls was enacted, the next day there was a meeting in Geneva.
Yep.
And once again, the Geneva Foundry, I'm assuming, took center stage, as it seems to every single month now. You were there. I believe you spoke.
Yep.
Were you one of the speakers?
Yes.
You were one of the speakers.
Yes, I spoke.
So talk to us about it and what your take is at this point with it.
The city's approach at the last meeting was to put forward a 2-page, 23-clause resolution that was touted as somehow addressing the residents' concerns and clearing the air.
Mm-hmm.
What it actually was a set of alternative facts meant to construct a narrative that did a couple of things. First, made the city look like it had done everything right. No regrets. And unambiguously circling the wagons. But then also chastised the public for engaging in what they said were personal attacks, and then reminding people what the rules were going to be going forward, citing these rules of procedure that were crafted and passed in order to govern how the city council conducted itself. So now taking those laws or those rules or suggestions and imposing them on the public. And I felt compelled to get up there and speak both to the factual issues, because the record, the significant set of documents, of which these are just a small portion, the record didn't support the assertions they were making in the resolution. And frankly, the tone was offensive. And I still in talking to some of the city leadership in the following weeks, it still puzzles me that I believe some people on city council, in city government, really believe that they have responded adequately to people's concerns. They said, really, people are just concerned that we clean it up. And I don't think they really understand that there are two separate but related issues. The first, yes, absolutely. Support the DEC in cleaning it up. That's got to happen, right? Mm-hmm. There's a process for that. Just make the process as smooth and quick as you can. That goes without saying. But the second part of that is coming clean, no pun intended, about what went wrong and giving people some reassurance that something like this won't happen again. Because as I pointed out in some of my discussions after the meeting, the feeling in the community is that if these results had come in on Nursery Avenue or Maxwell Avenue or any other part of the city, the word would have gotten out. People would have been told. People would have been given the recommended precautions back from 1999 not to garden, to wash their produce, to not let their kids play in open soil play yards. I share that belief that the residents have, that information should have and probably would have in other circumstances gone out directly to the public. So, as they say, they've got some explaining to do, right? And instead of actually just explaining it and having some accountability, it has become this digging in their heels, and it's really gotten quite terrible. Watching the city councilors interact with one another, you talk about needing an adult in the room, that is seriously lacking in Geneva. It's hard to find, it's hard to find some leadership there because, I mean, it made me sad. Sitting in the audience, it's not just this issue, just the way the council meetings are running, they can't get out of their own way. And it's unfortunate because you think about the city and all the great news that's been coming along about, the $10 million and the investment in downtown, and now these home ownership initiatives that the governor was in town announcing. And there's so much opportunity. But when you get something like that moving, you do need somebody steering the ship. And, to say that the city manager is going to be able totally on his own to manage all of this, I wouldn't want to put that on him. He needs a functional council. And there are a couple people on there who, like I said in my column, act like they're in middle school. And it's, I mean, there's no, that's what I understand. There's no excuse for it. I don't understand the jokes. It's not that, I don't know, city government is not like a playground.
Right.
So.
I wasn't at this past meeting, but I was at the meeting before that, and I felt like, frankly, that council didn't have any answers for people who were coming up and asking questions or, antagonizing them on a particular part of this problem. And is that a leadership problem, or is that just they don't have the answers don't exist, sorry, there's no information here, goodbye?
It's a leadership problem because even if you don't have the information, you need somebody able to step up and say, I can't answer your questions, but I think they're valid questions and I want to figure it out. Or, I don't think that's a valid question. I think that's a personal attack. And if you'd like to talk about somebody's conduct when they were a staff person, here's the way you can address it. But there wasn't anything. There are no boundaries. And so it's a free-for-all.
I was confused about the purpose of the resolution itself. I wasn't really sure why it was necessary. If they were looking to, squash down some of the negative energy coming from the other side of the other side of the podium, it seemed like there would have been other ways they could have gone about it.
Oh yeah, this made it worse, clearly.
I mean, so does it change anything? I mean, did you notice a tone change in terms of how people were actually addressing council or anything along those lines?
Well, they didn't end up passing this resolution. They tabled it. But the discussion of it, though, seems like it would... Right. If there were people in the room who felt like they were being on the edge of... If they were standing right on the fence between, appropriate and inappropriate, right, that it would make those folks sort of second-guess themselves and be like, okay, maybe I shouldn't take the tone that I was going to take. Well, do I think that anybody finds merit in not addressing the actions of particular people? No, I don't see anybody wanting to back down from those questions. I think there was one example from the previous meeting where somebody at the podium was specifically addressing one counselor and asking him a series of questions. And I vividly remember that one because I was there. It was a younger gentleman. I can't remember the name, but yeah. And I feel like, in the history of city council, I was frequently the subject of heated... Those types of comments. Yes. Yeah. People, Jackie Augustine, you said this, you did that, I don't like you. But you're a polarizing figure, though. Yes, and I think, but any public figure is. Any public figure has to be ready for that. Right. The question is then, how do you handle it? Now, do I think that the mayor is justified in saying, okay, that's out of order, you have to address council as a whole, please direct your questions at me? Mm-hmm. That's what a good presiding officer does. They run interference for the group. They don't shut people down. They absorb it, and then they process it, and they say, okay, I'm hearing you say these things. We're going to set aside the kind of emotional response to these points, and I hear you asking the following questions, I'm going to get you that information.
Right.
If the city had approached it in that way from the beginning, you wouldn't be having protests in front of every city council meeting.
Right.
You wouldn't have the hall packed with people ready to get up and risk getting the gavel to ask their question. And it is very telling that the mayor was very aggressive, gaveling anyone who even mentioned Councilor Eddington's name, whether they were speaking about him in the present, his actions in the present, his silence, or his handling of the issue. But when a speaker got up and spoke for 3 minutes about Councilor Marino and her personal and public conduct, they weren't stopped in any way. So if you're going to implement a policy, at least be consistent. I mean, even if I don't agree with the policy, I at least am looking for consistency in whatever policy is adopted. Otherwise, it just ends up being as clear as day that the group wants to protect one person, and that's all it's really about. It's not about public decorum. It's not about public discourse. It's not about public policy. It's about looking out for a friend and letting everybody else that they don't agree with kind of just hang out there on their own. And that's a problem.
So, the last two issues we've talked about are issues related to the way a governing body handles and processes information and how they convey that information to the public.
Right.
And I almost wonder that if it wouldn't be a really good investment for some of these municipalities to spend some money trying to figure out how PR works.
Right.
And it sounds terrible and it sounds really cheap to say that, but frankly, with as poorly as some of these elected officials get in there, I don't want to say how poorly they act, but how frequently they really do get in their own way.
Yeah, they stumble.
Of just doing very basic things. To me, if maybe there were some training or maybe there were some conversations happening behind the scenes so people understood, like, okay, this is how we're going to approach these types of situations, and this is our protocol for how we talk about these various things. I know they're thinking about that on the legal side.
Right, yes.
But I don't think they necessarily give that same consideration to the PR side, which is equally important because that's all people are exposed to. The people who are standing up at the podium every week or every month, they don't hear those legal conversations. They don't really care about the legal side of it or what protects city council or the city or whatever governing body you're talking about. They just want to know what information is relevant to them. So why not work on a strategy to actually get the information that people want out to them so you don't have this. So you don't have these situations happening over and over again. Because it's everywhere. It's not even just Seneca Falls and Geneva. It's Seneca County, it's Ontario County, it's Wayne County. It happens literally, I want to say like more than once a week. There are stories to this effect in various news outlets in the Finger Lakes where something was just, frankly, conveyed the wrong way.
Yeah,
and it snowballs.
Yeah, I think it speaks to what's going wrong in government in general, I think. People who get elected feel divorced from the people who elected them. So instead of saying, you know what, I am the person working for the people coming to the podium. I'm the person who has the privilege of sitting here making decisions that affect the lives of all the people participating in this meeting and outside of the meeting. Instead, it is this, guess what? I'm on city council, or I'm on the town board, and I don't answer to anybody, and I'll do what I like, and if you criticize me, forget it.
Right.
I don't understand it. I mean,
so,
why are you doing it? If you have that much contempt for the public, why are you doing it?
Full disclosure, we have a FOIL request out to the city of Geneva at this time.
Yes.
We have been actively pursuing that for, I want to say, about 3 weeks now. Where do you think now this entire Geneva Foundry issue goes? What will another resolution similar to that one appear at next month's meeting, or do you think do you think the vote down was enough, or the table is enough to, keep this at bay and to kind of allow the city to move forward, because the city does have to start to address this one way or another?
Right. I don't know, because, like I said, it's been so difficult to follow what procedure, if any, the council is actually themselves following. So in some situations, if something's tabled, it has to come up at a set time. In other cases, it might be an indefinite table. There was no discussion given. Usually if you table something, you'd want to say, we're tabling it because we need XYZ piece of information, and once we have that, we'll bring it back up for a vote. This was just, whoa, the discussion's getting wild, let's table this.
Right.
And in my view, that's not a good cause for a table. But so it's unclear to me whether this comes up again, or, if I were counseling the counselors, I would scrap this altogether and say, I'd pass a resolution that just said, we're sorry we even tried to pass that resolution, because we've come to our senses now, and now we hear you, and now we get it. But they don't need a resolution for that. They just need a heart. They just need some empathy and the willingness to understand that it is not weakness to express concern for the constituents. That is not a weakness. That's not a liability.
Can I even just piggyback off of what I said and say that it's also common sense?
Yeah.
It is in their best interest to handle this situation now publicly the right way,
right,
and not have any more of these trip-ups or mishaps.
No.
It would be in their best interest if they want to continue serving in their roles. If they want to continue, eventually everyone's going to be up for re-election. I don't know what the re-election schedule is in Geneva, but this has become such a large issue that this isn't going to be something that people forget in a year or 2 or 2.5 years.
Nope.
They will be the ones that are perceived as being responsible for it, whether it was actually their fault or not.
Right.
So it's in their best interest on the, again, PR side to look at it sensibly and not fall into these traps of we need to quiet these people who are coming to these meetings and just being loud and saying things about this person or that person.
Yeah.
That doesn't do you any good.
All it does is escalate the situation.
So speaking of talking, this is...
Yeah.
So Geneva, I'll say, took the indirect route to slowly try and clamp down on what was being said during the public comment section. Right. In Seneca Falls, they've gone the complete opposite route, and the supervisor has unilaterally decided himself at different times. I believe it's four or five meetings in the last year have had public comment banned.
Right.
I understand in the state town association of codes, whatever you want to call it, it's fair and it works, or so they say. But to what end? You're just quieting them for one meeting, and then my gut reaction to that is always, do you think those people who wanted to speak at that meeting are going to be told no one time on a one-off situation and then just be like, I'm never gonna go talk again, never gonna go before them? That's just gonna motivate them more to show up at the next meeting.
Right. Well, one of two things, right? If you ignore someone who's upset about something, who feels strongly about something, they will find a way to express that. Mm-hmm. So it will either be showing up at every subsequent meeting just to make a point,
right,
or it will be mobilizing in a quieter way to make sure that the people who quieted them never return to that office.
Right.
So I don't like you're saying, common sense, public relations, self-interest, right? These guys, their own self-interest should be telling them, don't alienate the public. Mm-hmm. But that's what I don't understand. Like, I understand if they're not motivated by morality and ethics, right? I always try to start with that argument, and you get the blank stare from people. But
it's because you're an ethics professor.
I know. But, I really do feel like if you got into public office, the public is your friend. They are not the enemy.
They voted for you.
Yeah,
they put you there.
And even if they didn't vote for you, they are part of the reason you're running, right? You run to represent everybody who lives there, not just a certain group. But it doesn't seem like many people have taken that attitude to heart. Instead, it's about lining up a constituency or lining up votes and pushing everybody else aside and asserting superiority, and I just think, man, what issues do these guys have that have not been worked out that they've got to get into public office and just put their thumb on everybody? I don't get it. I mean, yeah, maybe they should all go to therapy. I don't know what the answer is, but it doesn't seem like normal behavior. If someone were that controlling in your personal life, you would avoid them, I hope. It's a little bit of awareness there, right? If someone's acting like that in your personal life, avoid them. I don't understand the silencing the public. I mean, they're your boss.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't imagine,
I kind of conflicted because on one hand, I understand the argument. Supervisor Lazaro said, I believe every time he has banned public comment at a meeting, he has said it's because we want to get through X, Y, and Z business efficiently, and we have important things that we want to get done, and that's fine. I on one hand, I see that, and I understand what the concept behind it or what he's trying to say. But the flip side of it is that people who look at that from the outside, they aren't going to know that. They aren't having that intimate conversation with you and hearing someone say, well, we want to get through this, this, and this. You have maybe 50 people who show up to a town board meeting, maybe 80 or 100 that show up to a city council meeting, and the rest of the community is left with the lack of knowledge about what the reason was for it. Right. So I just wonder, if you don't like a particular issue that's coming up, or you feel like you're sick of hearing about the landfill issue, as an example in Seneca Falls, do something legislatively to move forward on that issue so those people stop coming to you all the time. Stop coming to the board. And I understand that may seem like a concession to some people that isn't reasonable or isn't fair to the people who are supporters of the landfilling operation in Seneca Falls. But that said, there still has to be meeting in the middle from both sides. There has to be meeting in the middle. And it just seems like one of the frustrating things, I think, and you've talked about it before, is the use of tabling in all government meetings. Yeah. It's like if there's even like a remote outside impression of doubt, let's table it.
Well, and what goes hand in hand with tabling is executive session.
Well,
it's let's table this so we can all talk amongst ourselves outside the public eye and decide what we're going to do about it and then bring it back.
And that's for me, that's a completely different pet peeve because seeing the number of executive sessions that happen.
Or even email. I mean, it doesn't have to even be at a called meeting.
But it's the point that if you're just tabling it because you don't want to deal with it right now, that's not the right thing. If you're going into executive session because you just are in you feel like you're backed into a corner and you're not sure what else to do, that's not the right way to handle it.
No. It's dishonest. I mean, no one wants to say that, but it is dishonest. I mean, here's what I've found. I have a lot of people who've disagreed with me. I've been to some really contentious meetings. I have never thought that the right answer was to put up a wall around myself, to say, no more, I'm done talking to you. I am, I'm not hearing anything you're going to say. I have always said, I don't agree with you, and here's why. And you want to know what ends up happening? You have a conversation, and then the conversation ends because the person feels heard, you've been heard, and you agree to disagree. And then you get to move on with the rest of the business. This is what seems to be missing. This is what these guys seem not to get, both in Seneca Falls and Geneva. This digging in your heels and trying to cut off discussion is a sign of weakness. It shows that you feel backed against the wall and you don't know how to defend your position in any reasonable way, and you don't know what to say. What was that?
Desperation.
It is. It's desperate. And all that does is embolden people, right? Let's play devil's advocate and say there are just some people who want to cause trouble at every meeting. I don't actually think that's the case, but that's the argument that's usually made. We've got to tighten up public comment because there are troublemakers who are just going to derail us. Let me tell you what. Give the public some credit. Let the troublemakers speak. And tell them you've heard what they said, and now you're moving on to a different issue. And the public will see it for what it is. Yep. But they don't trust the public's judgment. They think we're going to tell people what to think, and we're going to tell them that this position is not legitimate, so we're just going to prevent it from being heard. And if you were writing a manual on the worst way to do things, I think the past couple months of local government would be all you'd really need for a case study.
That's where we're going to leave that one. I'm not even going to try and second that one. So another one of the topics that we had talked about off and on throughout the first few episodes of this show was the continued debate over the future of healthcare and how it might impact people who live in the Finger Lakes. Congress has moved forward. I believe it's in the hands of Senate now.
Yep.
A couple local reps, Republicans, came down on opposite sides of the vote. Rep. Cacco said no. Tom Reed, yes. Interesting. Interesting because one of the quotes that I read afterwards from Cacco was that he didn't feel like it was the right piece of legislation for Central New York. Mm-hmm. And fair, pretty safe comment to make in that type of situation. But I thought making the comment at all was pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you were looking for the manual on how that situation would ordinarily have been handled, it would be vote no and then retreat and try to avoid the subject at all costs. But he seems to kind of be a little bit proud of it.
Yeah.
And that struck me as odd. As a Republican, you very rarely see my own point of view. I very rarely see Republicans do that in that type of way.
You mean break ranks?
Not only break ranks, but then not retreat. Right. Like very aggressively stand on the front side when it isn't a polarizing left-right issue. Right. When it's this is what your party is in favor of.
Right.
You say no and then stand by it and then jump out and say, this is why I said it.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting. He wrote a guest appearance in the Finger Lakes Times, which, his district, I understand that, part of the Finger Lakes Times readership overlaps with that, but that is really his most conservative base portion of his following, right? Yeah. So yeah, I actually thought that was a good sign of integrity, right? This is where people say, oh my goodness, she's going to say a Republican did something right. That's true, because for me, it's not about party. It's about conduct in office. Yep. And what upset me about Congressman Reed's vote was not simply that I disagree with his policy. It's that at his town hall meetings about the last vote, he gave a couple of conditions. He wanted to protect pre-existing conditions. He wouldn't vote for anything that didn't have a CBO score. And there was one more thing that now I've forgotten. And this bill violated all three of the principles he said were guiding his decision. and he never explained why he changed his mind.
Mm-hmm.
That is not okay, in my view. And Representative Katko did, and he said, and here's why. And for me, that is trust building, right? I feel more confident about his representation because, like him or not, agree with him or not, you know how he thinks and why he thinks what he thinks, instead of just everything being a mystery and some hand waving, and then there's legislation all of a sudden.
Congress is in this really weird spot. I've come to realize they're kind of like local elected officials, like a supervisor or a mayor, but they have to deal with all the big national issues that all of the local elected officials get the benefit of not having to deal with. They just, you glaze over them, you pass a resolution now and then, standing against something that really doesn't hold it. It's just symbolic. Yeah. But seeing this play out between the two of them, I've seen the really far right reject Katko's vote. Just really aggressively. And I've seen others in the middle and I think on the left who have, he's won over a couple of them. Right. And honestly, it gets into the whole, how long should terms be? And, is this just something to help re-election or, whatever you want to say. I wonder, though, if this isn't one of those rare cases, or maybe it's going to become the norm, where we start to see Republicans who have to play with these national issues as President Donald Trump, continues to become more and more divisive himself and sort of push himself out onto an island, even away from Republicans.
Right.
I wonder if you're not going to see some of the more moderate Republicans jump at the opportunity to make some friends in the middle, or even kind of on the left.
And I wish, if I had a magic wand, I would roll us back to, maybe this time never existed, but in my mind, it must have existed, a time when people were more interested in being statesmen than in being politicians. Because the middle is where legislation happens. It's where the individual interests and the national interests meet. So, you've got Katko who can say, there are some things about this bill I like, but as it affects my district, I don't like it, and I can't get it to balance in a way that I can support. That is like good, honorable decision making that we should expect. That's like the standard you should expect.
The bar.
Yeah, take the national thing, see how it fits with your local district, and see. I'm not saying always vote in your local interest because that's too parochial, but see, can we live with this? And instead, you just have people who want to keep their seats. So they're more concerned with being a politician. It's all about, is this going to get me votes? How's this going to play? No offense to what you were saying before about PR, but that might be more of the focus than actually legislating. But again, there's a balance there. You can't spin your way out of a bad idea.
Right.
I mean, people try all the time, but it eventually catches up to you. So there has to be, integrity and communication working in tandem. And it is woefully lacking. We got a lot of talk, a lot of bluster, and people aren't saying a whole lot. They're not producing a whole lot of legislation. They are, a lot of naming of stuff, but stuff that actually improves people's lives, and they're kind of unabashed about it. Like, that's not their primary job. Their primary job is getting reelected.
Well, okay, so, I believe healthcare was one of President Trump's claims for the first 100 days. He said he was going to make it happen. He said he was going to make a lot of things happen.
Right.
And I was out on the golf course the other day, and I was listening to some far-right Republicans discuss their views. And they were having a conversation among themselves, and I was just listening in, and I wonder at what point they're going to become frustrated, because you could tell it was starting to happen. They were starting, he promised he was going to do this, this, and this, and he's been roadblocked and he hasn't been able to get this done and he's screwed this, that, and that up. And I get to the point where I had said it before, if you don't follow through on all of the things that you're promising, at some point, even that base, that strong base, is going to get disappointed.
Right.
And you better figure out how you're going to make all of it happen, because if you don't, there could be a sort of title change between Republican and Democrat over the next 4 years. And these issues, healthcare, jobs, the economy, these are all really, really big taxes, giant issues that take years to move. Not days, not months, years. Really, if you want to fully fix something, it's going to take years to make happen. And this expectation of, nope, we'll do it. We just got to, put our heads down and we'll do it over a weekend.
Right.
It's not a college essay. Like this, we're not.
Yeah. I think this is the thread that ties our entire show together, and we didn't even intend it this way. But this is what I think is happening with people who initially supported Trump. It's hard to take him seriously because he is behaving like a kid, right? He's not behaving like an adult. He whines and complains about how he's being treated. Well, the way you overcome that is by doing stuff and by acting in a way that shows leadership. So there is a vacuum. That's what I hear Republicans complaining about. Where is their leader? Who is actually the leader of the Republican Party? Because it's not. It should be the president, and it's not.
Yeah.
Likewise, who's the leader of the Democratic Party? Who knows?
Right.
That's the most disorganized jumble of mess ever. So I think people are wondering why everything has reverted to complaints and quibbling and just everybody complaining. Like, who's actually showing up and doing the work?
Right.
There are no adults in the room.
Still
Not in
no
this
adults.
room. We've got 2 adults in this room, but
1.5. 1.5. I don't count myself as a full adult.
I'll try not to take that personally. No.
No, that's a me. So I guess the last thing to talk about, of course, hits and misses. It has been over a month. If you didn't do your homework, I shouldn't have to do this. I shouldn't have to have this conversation with you about homework. I'll go first.
Okay.
My hit and my miss is all one thing. So my last column in the Finger Lakes Times, I really took the County Board of Supervisors to task for the way they have treated, and some of them, not all of them, but portions of them at different times over the last couple of years have treated County Manager John Shepard. You have to understand that this person that you assign to this role, county manager of anything, has to do the job while you're not there. These elected officials are there 2 days a month, maybe 3 if they have a special committee meeting, and the rest of the time you're leaving that person to do the job. And I felt like they were getting in the way of him doing his job, micromanaging, undermining, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Then at that last Tuesday's meeting, a couple of the supervisors actually went on the record and outright said that they were a little disappointed with the way they handled the situation, and they sort of saw the error of their ways. And for me, it was a hit and a miss. So it was a miss to start. Now it's a hit.
Right.
And kudos to them for figuring it out and getting it right.
That's
I guess.
Great. That's great. See, you're pushing them to be self-reflective. That's
my
good.
concern, though, is that it actually, one meeting. We're one meeting deep right now. Yeah. I want to see if this sticks 2 or 3 meetings deep. We'll be talking about that again.
Right. Well, I guess my miss is lack of adults, lack of maturity.
Yep.
And my hit, though, I have to say, Councilor Grieco in Geneva shepherded through Martin Luther King Memorial Project and actually was able to effectively push back on some movement by a couple other elected officials to kind of marginalize this monument and kind of put it in a neighborhood where they thought it would be more appropriate. And he held his ground, and this past Wednesday night, they dedicated this memorial site. So I think that's I think that is that's a hit, because that is an example of listening to the community and standing up on principle.
Ooh, principle. We love that here. Well, that's going to do it for this week's pod. We will be back in a couple weeks, most likely. Stay tuned to our Facebook page. Like us over there. Follow us there, whichever you prefer. We'll be updating on when we will be coming back next. Second Wednesday of June will most likely be that date. Until then, stay informed, and we will talk to you soon.